All right, so I will be talking a little bit about promises and asynchronous code in general. So just show of hands, has anyone ever used promises before? Sweet. Okay, so, well, then I can just go, because you guys already know what I'm going to talk about. So just for anyone out there who hasn't done promises, or for anyone who has done promises but doesn't really know anything about them, or put up their hand but was too embarrassed to say that they didn't actually know what they were doing. Believe me, I've been there, it's okay. So a little bit of a story. When I was writing my master's dissertation, I was at a university that had multiple libraries in multiple locations, all information of which I needed. So I work in a way when I like to write dissertations where I sit down, I write the introduction, I write the next paragraph, I write the next paragraph, I write the next paragraph, you see where I'm going with this, and then I write the conclusion. Now, in the middle, I might need some information. I might need some specific data to put into my dissertation. But I work in a very single-threaded way. So one way of doing it is I write my introduction, I go out to one library, fetch the resource, come back, write the next paragraph, go out to the next library, come back, write my next paragraph. That, well, is a lot of work for me and I'm lazy. So the other way of doing it is that I could just go out and get all the resources I need ahead of time, come down, sit, and write my thesis. But since my thesis administrators kind of wanted to read each paragraph as they came out to see how I'm doing, that one doesn't work as well either. So I came up with a great way of doing it. As I'm writing, I can send friends out to go and fetch the information that I need. So I can continue writing and I can say, well, I'm writing about the United Kingdom and I need to know the population of the United Kingdom. So I write my paragraph and I leave a blank and say the population of the United Kingdom is, can you look that up on your phone for a second? I'll come back and insert that later. They go out, they go to the library, come back, put it in. And I can continue writing. So I don't lose time going out, and I don't have to worry about when you come back with the population of the United Kingdom, I am now so lost in the rest of my thesis that I don't remember where it goes. So this is the essence of promises and asynchronous code. I can go out to different places, get different pieces of information, and I can tell them what to do with the information when it comes back. And I can all do it in real time as I'm coding. So I can pretend I'm being single-threaded while actually I'm being multi-threaded. So, as you guys know, JavaScript is synchronous, it is single-threaded, and when JavaScript calls an asynchronous function, the current block of JavaScript continues to run. So I asked you to go and look up the population of the United Kingdom on your phone. I'm continuing to speak and I still don't know the answer. So if I say the population of the United Kingdom is undefined. So this is very useful when you're making API requests, especially to a backend, and you don't know how long it's going to take, you don't know where it's fetching the information from. So just in this particular instance, and I'm sure you guys have all seen this before, component will mount, I get the user ID from session token from whatever, I insert it manually. I fetch the user details from the user API. Now meantime, I've gone out to my backend and it is doing these steps. So fetching user by ID endpoint, fetching user from the database, and then it returns it. But meanwhile, I've already decided to set my state with the user ID that I don't know yet. Can anyone see a problem with this? So one of the problems is, one, I don't know what the user ID is yet, so I'm now displaying it on my screen, welcome user, I don't know who you are, and potentially this user doesn't even exist. So I've now continued with my code, and I'm potentially displaying something or logging someone in without even knowing what their ID is. And it doesn't even exist. So there's a big problem. Keep going. There we go. So I wrote this out a little bit in some code that I'm going to walk you guys through. I didn't want to program while I was speaking to you because that's boring, and if I make mistakes, I don't want to debug in real time. So I've simulated an asynchronous call just with timeouts. So you can see I wanted to do a hello world. I did hello with my name. I fetched the username, but it takes 3 seconds to come. In this particular case, it doesn't know who I am because at the time that I'm fetching name, this is undefined. It doesn't know what it is. It hasn't returned anything. So in this particular case, I extracted this to a separate service, so you can pretend that this is some API working in the back end. And again, I've fetched, but I've tried to use set state because I've done React and I know that the set state is asynchronous, so maybe this will work. It does not. So once again, I fetched my username, but name isn't known. So when I set the state with name, it doesn't know who I am. So this one will fail. Go to the next one. Go. I'm gonna try again. There we go. So as you can see, I just threw a console log in it. So you can see at the bottom, you might be able to see it's quite small. It prints out undefined, just in case you guys thought I was lying. So we've got a couple of options when it comes to asynchronous programming. So one of them is callbacks, and one of them is promises. So callbacks, they have their own advantages. I particularly like them if I'm just doing something very small with one call and just calling back like one action at the end. Because it's easy, in JavaScript in particular, you can pass functions around as objects. It's great for that. The downside is that you can't chain them very easily. Has anyone ever heard of callback hell before? Yeah. Has anyone ever been in callback hell before? Yeah. So promises, it's easily chainable. So if I need lots of information, which anyone who's written a big piece of production code would know, you got to get your user ID, you got to get your game settings, your everything else. You might need to be able to chain them together and get them in different ways. And this is a lot easier. So I'm going to show you quickly. I didn't write this, I just skipped this from the internet. Callback hell. Anyone seen a big pyramid like this before? It's quite hard to see exactly what everything is doing and how long it's going to take in general, and if each of these is extracted. There's a lot of functions going on, a lot of naming, a lot of like handle callback, callback, on handle callback, callback, like gets ugly. So I'd rather not do that unless I'm doing something extremely small. So the other thing that I don't like about callbacks is if you're dealing with like a container and then a component and then a view and then a component and then a component, you have to put the callback all the way down and then come all the way back up again. So I like promises. I've been using them a lot more. So I know almost everybody in this room raised their hand, but just in case someone didn't or raised their hand even though they don't know what they're talking about, promises, the way you create them is reasonably easy. You create a new promise, and then it takes two functions as its parameters. A resolve, I was successful, I found the information you wanted, and a reject, I couldn't find the information you wanted, you did something wrong, I don't want to work. And so you can define what happens when it gets resolved and when it gets rejected. So in this particular case, the promise sort of says, I just say, I want my program to say hello to me. So I'm going to set the timeout to simulate asynchronous calling, and then I'm just going to resolve it. So no matter what happens, it is always going to resolve that name. This is a very basic piece of code, but for its purposes. And then over here, in my function, what I've done is I've said what to do when it gets the information. So in this particular case, when it gets my name, whatever information, I want it to set state. In this particular case, I used a React example because this is React. So it should fetch my name and then set the init status to successful and set my name, which will get put here. Let's see if it does it. Okay, clearly I can't be that far away. So yeah, after 3,000 milliseconds, it says hello Hilary. So it initially said hello world, because one of the great things about promises is that you can actually work with what it's doing while it's fetching. So you can put fetching screens or waiting screens or spinners or whatever you want. I just started with hello world and then it went to hello Hilary. And you can actually see I still have the console log, so at first the name was world and then it was Hilary. All right, so let me just. So in this case, what if something goes wrong? What if I reject what I've got? So in this case, I put just something in. If your name length is equal to 6, I'm going to reject because for some reason usernames cannot have the length 6. I don't know why, I just said it. So in this case, I need to be able to say what to do when it gets rejected. So I catch the error. Anyone that's used try catch blocks, same word, catch. So I'm catching the error, and in this case, no one. We don't know what the name is isn't there. And I just put an init status. So you can see there's a name error and it says hello no one because I requested a name with exactly 6 letters long. So I've updated my services now and I've added a second one. So in this particular case, I've got my first service, and instead of it only being one name, I've got 3 users and they each have names. They also have home countries. One of them's Canada, one of them's Essos, one of them's Westeros. I really hope at least one person in this room gets that reference. So there could come a time when you need to fetch information from more than one place, and potentially one piece of information could rely on the other. So in this particular case, we've got names and home countries, both of which I need for my purposes. The first way to do it is you could just say promise all. That's just resolve all my promises and give me back all the information when it comes. Do it however you want. So in this particular case, this will take 3 seconds to come. In this case, it'll take 2 seconds to come, because it's a bit faster. But I only want to render what I want when everything is in. Lucky for me, neither one relies on the other. They can both be done independently, or I can do as many promises as I want. And what you see is that it'll show up at the same time. Hello, Hilary McReynolds, citizen of Canada. And you can still see the logs in the bottom that show you where it started and what got printed later. So the thing about this is that, as you can see in the previous one, I put results of 0, results of 1. It's an array, but I know that it will put the results in the order of the promises that I specified. Because you can see this one is a second shorter than that one, and it still showed up second. So you can sort of rely on this one. But in this particular case, I've changed address service, that instead of pairing user IDs with locations, it pairs names with locations. This could be a way that your database is set up. So I need to know what user one's name is before I can find where they're from. So in this particular case, I need the information first. So in my then, for the first call, I make my second call because I've got access to the name. I make a call there, I find the homeland, and I can set everything. So I'm fetching one thing first, setting my state, then fetching the next thing with my results. It's great, it works. In this particular case, I don't know whether, so I set up a couple of videos so that you could see the delay, but I don't know if they're gonna work. You can see both, but my name shows up first, and then 2 seconds later, the country shows up. This might be your programming call, you might wanna do this, you might not. And there's a downside to this, that if I accidentally fetch my homeland with user ID because I didn't realize that address service had been changed, it's not going to catch the error, and it's not going to show the error the way I want, because it doesn't know to catch the inner promise. This is one of the big ones that I find I see on a lot of pull requests where things are going wrong and they don't know why. So if you're going to learn one thing from this lesson, it's remember this one. So you got 2 options. One of them, let's go. So one of them is you could have a catch statement for both of your promises. Now this could get into some problems if you're now fetching 5 different promises, some of which rely on others, and you don't know, you have a different way of catching each of them. You could get into a lot of thens and catches, and then you're basically in callback hell again because it's a big pyramid. So then the other way is, instead of just fetching your homeland, you then return the promise itself. So this is an easier way of doing it if this is the result that you want. So obviously it's developer's choice because there are reasons for each one, but this is a better way of doing it because your catch error will now catch any mistakes in any promises that you're making. Downside is now you don't know which promise is failing unless you make your error message specific enough. So here's a nice way of just making it a bit more succinct, is that instead of having to nest this then, you can just keep then, you won't have to nest them. But once again, so the downside of this one is that I now don't have access to the name, because the name is in this block, and my homeland call doesn't have access to that. So what you'll see is, in this, I wonder if this video is going to work. So you should see the effect of this. So first name, then country shows up. And in this particular case, I still returned my promise so that it would be caught by the global catch, but I left my then inside the original promise so that I would have access to its result. Developer's choice. And then the result of this is, let's see, let's go, both show up at the same time. Obviously, developer's choice, there's reasons for doing either one, but that is the gist of how you get there. This particular method is really cool because you can nest a lot of thens that just process the data. For anyone that's dealt with a large DTO with lots and lots of noise, this is a great way to get rid of some of it. So in this particular, I don't think I forgot to put, I updated my user service to have an object as opposed to just a string. So for user ID, you have a name and a job title. So in this particular case, I can process and I can just go from user, get the name, and then name split because I just want the first name. So this is a pretty useful way to chain them because you can extract each of those into its own function, which can be unit tested. And I'm a big fan of small functions that do one thing and are easily tested. I'm a big testing person. It annoys a lot of people. So here's one last thing. This is new with ES 2016, which is ES 7, I get confused by the name sometimes, is that you can create asynchronous functions that wait for the information. It's just a different way of doing the promises. And some people like it better. Honestly, I don't really have an opinion on which one's better. So what you can see over here is that instead of updating my set state, I'm just returning the promise. So presumably from here, I should be able to just get the name of my homeland if this weren't an asynchronous call. If it were just a function, I should be able to just get the value. But I can't because it's undefined. Because it won't know that for another 5 seconds. So what we can do is we can create async functions. And the await keyword is only useful in async functions. It will not work if you don't wrap your function in an async. So what I can say is this function is going to be asynchronous. Now instead of wrapping things in then, thens, and thens, I can just assign the value once it's found. And this, it works in a cleaner way than wrapping thens and catches and everything like that. And you can get it from multiple sources, multiple different pieces of information. And they can rely on each other, is I can use the username to fetch the homeland because I've just waited for it, then I wait for the next one, then I wait for the next one, then I wait for the next one, then I wait for the next one. And at the end, I'm going to set the state, and it's going to work. If you want to catch this one, you got to wrap it in a try-catch. But everybody should be pretty familiar with try-catch blocks. You can catch the error in the same way that you would do just synchronous code. So the good things about await is that you can write it in a more synchronous way because you're just saying set variable equal to this when it's found. Set this variable equal to this when it's found. So don't make promises you can't catch. That's all I got.